The views and opinions expressed by the following program and its participants are solely their current opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Bobo 89.1 FM and DMS Broadcasting respective stations. The program participants' opinions are based upon information they consider reliable and based on their knowledge.
Looking for something fun and different to do with the family? Join us at the Cayman Turtle Center for Grill and Chill Saturdays. Every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., enjoy a poolside barbecue, buckets of beer and daiquiri specials, and a live DJ. It's Grill and Chill Saturdays at Cayman Turtle Center.
Green sea turtle nesting season's approaching. Here's a few tips to keeping our friends safe. Turn off, redirect, or shield any lights that can be seen from the beach. Remove obstacles and litter from the beach. No bonfires on the beach, and remain quiet and distant if you see a nesting turtle. This message from the Cayman Turtle Center.
Welcome to Cayman Turtle Center.
A day of fun and adventure awaits at Cayman Turtle Center Island Wildlife Encounter. Swim and snorkel alongside sea turtles and other marine life. Meet tropical birds in the aviary, ride our turtle twister water slide, or simply relax by the lagoon. Plan your adventure today.
Visit us online at www.turtle.ky.
Shelby the Turtle here at the Cayman Turtle Center. Did you know that turtles breathe air just like people, but we can hold our breath a lot longer than our human friends, between 4 and 7 hours underwater? Come and visit me. I'm the largest turtle at the center, weighing in at 585 pounds.
Visit the Cayman Turtle Center and explore Shelby and her friends.
Good morning, listeners. Welcome back to The Green Scene, hosted by the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center. My name is Gadi Sislop. I'm the curator for terrestrial exhibits and education programs at the Cayman Turtle Center. And also joined by Education Officer Shauna McGill. And this is our second season of the talk show, The Green Scene. We invite you to tune in every Saturday at 11 a.m. right here on Bobo 89.1 FM. We will be discussing the conservation, wildlife, the environment, culture, and more. In each episode, we explore topics related to conservation here in the Cayman Islands, including protecting our natural environment, preserving our culture and heritage, and talking about sea turtles, of course, and other native wildlife and wild places. So, today we will be discussing invasive species here in the Cayman Islands and globally. Right? So, we're going to get right into it because, first of all, we have to know what is considered an invasive species. So I'm going to read something here, a definition that we found online. So, an invasive species of flora and fauna is a non-native species whose introduction is likely to cause economic or environmental harm, or harm to human, animal, or plant health. Okay? So invasive species tend to expand and modify ecosystems that they've been introduced to, as opposed to what the native species do, which are part of that ecosystem. So some other things you need to know: invasive species tend to be generally non-native species that have colonized a new area to the point of damaging or causing damage to the surrounding environment. And they're seen as one of the top major threats to our ecosystems today. And that's not just here in Cayman, but that's around the world. So, any comments, Shauna?
So I definitely think here we are sort of seeing the invasive species issue under a microscope because we are an island population. And the benefit of being an island population is having all these unique and endemic species here, like the Cayman parrot, the blue iguana, which are only found here in the whole world. But the downside to that is because they are so secluded to that one island, the threats of invasive species and other things are quite magnified on them.
Oh, this is true because we're sort of a little insular system here, so it's not like we can replace it with things migrating from nearby. It's not that simple as it is on the mainland, and so the impact of one invasive species can be, as you said, pretty much magnified here.
Yeah. Especially if you look at how relatively new, and I say relatively in bunny quotes, relatively new invasive species are in terms of, say, the lionfish or, the blue and green iguana, because our marine life has grown up not recognizing the lionfish as a prey source, and it can make itself look bigger. And it also has lots of venomous spines on it, which poses a risk to not only humans, but the animals in the ocean. And they don't recognize that they can eat it. Whereas where the lionfish is found, its predators heavily recognize that they can be hunted and eaten. So that's an issue. And then when you look at the blue iguana, excuse me again, I'm so sorry. The blue iguana here has evolved with not having really large predators here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where something like the green iguana has. So their instincts to run away and recognize threats is a lot better than, say, the blues.
Yeah. So they outcompete our native wildlife. And just again, reading some more quotes. These invasive species don't just show up. Most of them they're introduced usually into a new environment. They can be brought from things like ships, fishing equipment, accidental releases like escaped pets, like as we see some escaped parrots flying around South Sound. Mm-hmm. And it's worrying for us because these guys can damage ecosystems just like that. And sometimes you don't even know that they're here until all of a sudden it's too late by the time you notice them. And they're quite capable of doing quite a lot of damage, in some cases causing extinctions of plants and animals and reducing biodiversity. And again, that word keeps coming up, biodiversity. A lot of people I'm not sure if everybody completely understands the depth of that word, but variety, if you think of it, variety is the spice of life. And the more variety you have, the more resolute or resilient an ecosystem is, because you have more species that can compensate for each other, if you want to think of it that way. But invasive species can wipe out your biodiversity, they can alter your habitat, and of course once that happens, it eventually gets to us, because some of this stuff is going on and people don't know, and they don't know because it's not affecting them as they drive around their cars and pick up their kids from school and that kind of stuff, until all of a sudden it happens. So, yeah. But some examples of invasive species, just to put that in perspective. One thing I can think of right away, most people know about, is the reticulated pythons in Florida. Florida itself is like the definition of invasive species. But yeah, the pythons in Florida, look at the impact they're having. Replacing the top predators or competing with the top predators in that Everglades ecosystem. And I'm sure there are other species, there are other examples around the world. Maybe some in Europe, example.
Yeah, so we definitely have the Scottish wildcat, which has the regular house cat problem there, where it's readily interbreeding with regular house cats and causing issues in terms of their conservation, because it's creating hybrid species, which is making it difficult to create conservation programs and conservation areas and identifying natural Scottish wildcats.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing. Just imagine what would happen if we started getting hybrid blue-green iguanas. Oh, horrors. And that's not entirely impossible.
No, they've definitely... I know of at least one occurrence where they've clocked a hybrid between a green iguana and one of the sister islands rock iguanas. So that's happening, or happened already in the past.
Wow. Okay. But I looked up some of the more well-known ones, or the more impactful ones, besides the pythons in Florida. And of course, Florida has their own green iguanas, and whatever else is not supposed to be there. The brown tree snake in Guam, which wiped out a number of nesting birds, and Guam is a small island just like we are. So they introduce a predator that they're not used to, and a bunch of species, including the Guam rail, which is a small reclusive wetland bird that nests on the ground, was wiped out pretty much. Lionfish. Well, people know about lionfish and the impact that they can have. Some other African killer bees. We've heard about those and the impact that they have. So ever since they got loose in Brazil and moved all the way up into North America, even. Zebra mussels. Some of them are not necessarily big moving animals, but zebra mussels, which is like a little shellfish, and those things can proliferate so much that they clog up drains and pipes, and of course they just clog up an ecosystem where nothing else can grow. And of course they're invasive plants, because it's not just restricted to wildlife, to animals, plants as well, and they can cause an impact. So just to put it in perspective for some of you Caymans, imagine if we just had a forest full of maiden plum. That's like the equivalent of when Brazilian pepper comes in. And of course, Florida again, wow. Brazilian pepper is a big problem in Florida. And we do have some, but the thing is, as you mentioned, Cayman's biodiversity as a small island ecosystem, it's so precious and unique. And even if for our own, I like to think of ways it affects us, even for our own selfish reasons. Let's just suppose that we discovered one of these unique species of plants here has a cure for some disease. That's not entirely impossible because it's happened before. And we lose that because of invasive species. That's why we need to pay attention to things like that. But some local examples of invasives, we already mentioned
the lionfish. We've already said. The green iguana.
Green iguanas, definitely. Everybody knows about that.
If you want plants, which I'll be honest, plants are not my specialty. I am definitely more focused in animals. But some iconic plants that we recognize here in Cayman are actually invasive species. So you do have that pine tree. I believe it's the Australian pine.
Yes,
there's another name for it too.
Yeah.
So found along Governor's Beach and lots of beaches here. That's actually an invasive species. You also have the wild tamarind, which provides food for a lot of species here, including the Cayman parrot. But that too is an invasive plant species.
Yeah. And interesting, I think I remember just before Hurricane Ivan hit, the casuarina trees were such an issue that the government was actually considering getting involved, as in going and cutting and moving them off of the coastline because they were choking out all the native species, the sea grapes and, not mangroves, but other native species, cordias and so on, that were natural to the coastline, better suited to keeping the sand in place and not using up so much water.
And those massive root systems.
Yes.
As well.
Massive shallow root systems. But then along came Hurricane Ivan, that took care of the problem for a lot of them because they're so shallow rooted, they just fell over.
Yeah.
But of course, they grew back pretty quickly. But if you go on our local DOE website, Department of Environment website, they list a number of local invasive species. I'll just read out some of the list because maybe some people don't realize. Monk parakeets, or as people call them, Quaker parrots. Again, they were much a bigger problem just before Hurricane Ivan. I know CUC had a vendetta with those guys, building the nests right next to transformers and causing fires.
You can see a lot of the big nests in the palm trees close to Sunset House as well.
Yeah, yes. Peafowl, are considered an invasive species, or peacocks as people like to call them. But remember, peacocks are the males, peahens are the females. Together they're called peafowl. Honduranian parrots, yellow-naped Amazons. There is a small breeding population of them on the island. And potentially they're hybrids. Because I've seen a couple that suspected looking like hybrids with Grand Cayman parrots.
That's the downside of them being an Amazon and ours being an Amazon parrot too. It can cause those problems.
Yeah. Chickens.
Chickens all over the place.
Need we say more? Also, pigeons. Just your regular racing pigeons or carrier pigeons. Rock doves. Those have the potential to become an even more of an invasive species here. Anybody from big cities in North America or Europe will know about what those pigeons can do. And I noticed another species that people haven't talked much about is the Eurasian ringneck dove. Because I've noticed, especially around the Turtle Center where we are, at first there used to be a proliferation of white-winged doves. But over time, that population has completely changed to ringneck doves.
There's a lot of ringneck doves up there.
Yeah, because they're bigger, they're more aggressive than the local white wings, and they just push them out. Red-eared sliders.
That's an important one.
Way back when, people used to have a bunch of them, cute little things with little red patches on the side of the neck. Kept them in aquariums. They grew up bigger. People didn't want them anymore. They just dumped them in the ponds, and now they're hybridizing, with our local hickory, which is also in the slider family. And of course, you mentioned the Australian pine and wild tamarind. And course, the Brazilian pepper. I don't know if many people know about that one, but...
Very dangerous.
Yes, very dangerous. So, yeah, invasive species is a topic that I don't think many people appreciate the full impact of. And like you said, some things we just kind of take for granted that are invasive. And a little later on, well, in the next section, we're going to be bringing in our special guest, AJ from National Trust, and he's going to give us a little bit more detail on invasive species and maybe some insights that we didn't think of. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to bring in AJ and we're going to talk a little more in depth on invasive species. So right now, we're going to take a little commercial break. You're listening to The Green Scene here on Cayman, Bobo 89.1 FM, hosted by the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center. We'll be right back.
Looking for something fun and different to do with the family? Join us at the Cayman Turtle Center for Grill and Chill Saturdays. Every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., enjoy a poolside barbecue, buckets of beer and daiquiri specials, and a live DJ. It's Grill and Chill Saturdays at Cayman Turtle Center.
Did you know that turtles play an important role in ocean ecosystems? Turtles maintain healthy seagrass beds and coral reefs, providing key habitat for other marine life and helping to balance marine food webs and nutrient cycling. Learn more about our turtle friends at the Cayman Turtle Center.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm a Cayman parrot at the Cayman Turtle Center. I was rescued and love my home here. Did you know our human friends at the center breed and raise Cayman parrots, the national bird of the Cayman Islands, then release them to live in the wild? Come visit me and my bird friends at Cayman Turtle Center.
Good morning, listeners, and welcome back to The Green Scene, hosted by the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center. My name is Gaddis Hislop. I'm joined in the studio today by our Education Programs Officer, Shauna McGill. Today we are discussing invasive species of plants and animals. So in our first section, we talked a little bit about the definition of invasives and some impacts of some of them around the world. But in studio this morning, we're joined by AJ McGovern from the National Trust for the Cayman Islands. AJ is actually doing a bit of an expert on invasive species here. So we're going to let him come in here and give us some insights. So AJ, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Sure.
Excited to be here.
Yeah, can you give us a little background about yourself?
Yeah, so originally I grew up in Long Island, New York, and loved nature.
Island.
Yeah, exactly. Out by the beach, spent all my time in nature that I could, Boy Scouts, everything like that. And then I went and studied wildlife ecology and management at the University of Maryland in College Park. Was very interested in the interaction between people and nature. And really interested in getting people into nature, getting people excited about nature, learning more about nature. So I, after that, bounced around the tropics as a scuba instructor for a long time. I was in Thailand, Australia, Indonesia, Hawaii, a couple other places. And then went back and did my master's degree in sustainable tourism at the University of North Texas and a university in Costa Rica called Cartier. And then found my way here to Cayman. I worked for about 5 years at the Ritz-Carlton here as a supervisor in the Ambassadors of the Environment program. So getting people out into nature, teaching them about the amazing things that Cayman has to offer both above and below water. And I was always a member of the National Trust for the Cayman Islands ever since I got here, because I love what the Trust does in protecting and preserving the natural and cultural heritage of the Cayman Islands. And I had an opportunity a couple years ago to join the team as the Environmental Policy and Development Officer.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And so one of my main things there I'm working on is an invasive species strategy for the Trust. So across all 3 islands, because the Trust, of course, operates on all 3 islands, protecting valuable environmental land and native flora and fauna. So unfortunately, that means we have to deal with invasive species, because they're probably the most acute threat right now to Cayman's native species. So there's other threats like habitat loss, pollution, climate change, direct take, so poaching and things like that. And those are all happening too. Those are the 5 main drivers around the world of biodiversity loss. But the one that's probably the most worrying at the current moment here is these invasive species, just because of the very nature of an island ecosystem. So that's what I'm working on, which is really interesting, because it's every different one is a different challenge, every different invasive species. I went out last night and shot 2 lionfish, and I don't think anybody gets all that emotional about the loss of 2 lionfish from the world. But then you get into other invasive species that do provoke really strong emotions. Cats, dogs, even chickens. And it's understandable, because those are creatures that have been associated with people for thousands of years. They've been companions, they've been food sources. So those understandably kind of bring up a lot more emotions. And so what you have to do with each one is very different, which I find an interesting challenge, because I like working with people. So invasive species are a people problem a lot of the time.
Yeah, well, I think I read a quote by, I can't remember who it was, in National Geographic, that almost every environmental issue has a human element to it. Yeah. In one way or the other.
Nowadays, yes, definitely.
Yeah, that doesn't sound good for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, so invasive species. So what kind of species, so maybe you can give us your list of species that you're considering.
Yeah, I mean, well, Cayman is a really interesting place, because if you actually think about it, Cayman was isolated from people for longer than most other places. I mean, 1503 discovery, that's late if you think about it. So our native wildlife here, our plants and animals, they didn't have to deal with human impacts or anything else being brought here unnaturally until much later than most other places in the world. So but once people got here, it happened pretty much immediately. If you think about those first ships that would have came to Cayman, they would have had rats on them. Every ship did. Rats. Those probably would have gotten off. They would have had cats on them to control those rats. Those cats would have gotten off. And so that was probably the beginning of these introductions. And that's the thing, these introduced species, it's now happening faster and faster as the world becomes, a smaller place, and more stuff is traveling around the world. We're carrying things from place to place. And so it's happening faster and faster. And most things that get introduced don't make it. They fail to survive because it's not their preferred environment. They don't do well. They can't live, they can't breed, they can't propagate. So only a very small percentage, the old rule of thumb was like 10% of introduced species will become established, whereas they're here.
That's still a big number.
It is a big number when you consider how many things get introduced. But that 10% can become established, which means they're surviving on their own. They're breeding. They've got their own self-sustaining population. And then the other rule of thumb after that was about 10% of those would become invasive. They would become a problem, because we've got plenty of introduced species here in Cayman that we don't consider a problem. Mangoes is the one that I go to. You go walk around and there's mango trees all over the place. They're not native to here, but they're not really causing a problem ecologically. Whereas we're starting to deal with, or continuing to deal with, problems from other things like rats, like green iguanas, which, I think we can all remember a few years ago what the green iguana situation was like. And one of the things at the National Trust we were worried about was those green iguanas. For one, we did see them hybridize at least once with the sister island rock iguana. And the other thing was that they were carrying this Helicobacter disease that could kill the blue iguanas very quickly. It was super dangerous to the blue iguanas. And so that's when they start to become a worrisome problem. And so dealing with that, unfortunately, one of the ones that I am dealing with the most is cats. We have a lot of cats in the Cayman Islands, way more than people can seem to care for. And they're everywhere. These are not just community cats that are living near places. I collected a camera that we had out in our Colliers Reserve, far out east, and it was in the middle of the reserve, very far from everything, really no people living anywhere near around. And on that camera, I had at least 4 different cats that I could identify, maybe more. I have to still figure some of the nighttime shots. It's kind of hard to tell differences in patterns on them to identify them. But that is a really remote location on island, and there were at least 4 different cats passing by this one camera.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, those cats are out there doing what they have to do. They have nobody feeding them, nobody provisioning for them, so they are hunting to survive. And that's where we're releasing our blue iguanas, which, until they get to a full-grown size, are very vulnerable to cat predation, and not used to it. Like you said, Shona, sorry.
You're all right.
They're naive. They evolved without predators, and cats are a special kind of predator. They're these mammalian predators that they have the ability to hunt all night. They're not dependent on, the warmth of the sun to keep them going, but they have these high metabolisms. They have to eat a lot, and they eat a lot of different things. That's what tends to be the invasive species that do really well are generalists, because they can be tossed into a new environment that they don't know, they're not used to, but they have a lot of different ways that they can survive. So they're really good at that. Say the green iguanas as well were really good. They could eat all different things. They have a lot of babies. They're good at getting away from predators. They do really well. The lionfish eat just about everything smaller than them. So again, these generalists tend to be really the invasives that are the most successful. And you see them all around the world. You see the same invasive species all around the world. Rats can survive just about anywhere on anything. And so they're one of the ones that we're really worried about too, because they'll predate on eggs, they'll predate on baby birds, on baby iguanas. So they're another big concern. So we've got a lot of different ones that we're worried about, and it's not an abstract problem. There were 3 native mammals in Cayman before people got here. They all disappeared really quickly. We had 2 different Hutia species. 2, yeah. And a Geocaprames and a Caprames, and then a little shrew-like animal. And that disappeared. They all disappeared really quickly, probably because of rats, cats, dogs, when people first got here. Or even before people were really around, but after people had visited once and dropped some of these rats and cats off. So it's a thing that you see. About 90% of all recorded island extinctions have been attributed mostly to invasive species. So that means the invasive species were the main cause of the extinction. And that's because islands are just so vulnerable to this. It's such a problem on islands that these endemic species that are only found in one place, or just, things like our brown boobies over on the Brac, which are not used to having predators like that. They nest right on the ground. The eggs are right on, the egg and the mama or the dad are right on the ground. Then the baby is just sitting there on the ground, totally vulnerable. And so these species, they evolved on islands to become lazy, or where they don't, if you don't have to defend against predators, or you don't have to worry about so many of your babies getting eaten. The blue iguanas have way less babies, and that suited them just fine when they didn't have predators. And the boobies, they could nest on the ground when they didn't have predators. But now we've introduced to this problem, and so it's something that we have to deal with. It's not to demonize any of the invasive species. It's just that we need to protect our native species. We could lose them.
Yeah, no, that's an important point, because like I said earlier, a lot of these issues, including invasives, can be attributed to humans in some way or the other, and that, to me, that puts a responsibility on us to do something about it. At the Turtle Center, of course, we have this thing where the Europeans themselves wiped out the turtle population way before people even came to the island, and so we have to do something about it, because the turtles aren't going to come back on their own, and so we definitely have to do something about it.
Yeah, I always use that as an example, because I like to think of these native species they're part of the story of Cayman. You can't tell the story of Cayman without turtles. And not so long ago, there was a very real chance that they would have been gone. They almost disappeared. And Caymanians came up with a lot of innovative ways to make sure that didn't happen. But could you imagine if they had disappeared, and the only way that a kid growing up in Cayman could know about turtles is to read about them in a book or to be told the story by their great-grandparent? That would be such a sad thing, and that's something that is a very real possibility right now with things like the Sister Islands rock iguana, with the brown booby. That booby colony on the Brac at one point was thousands of birds, and the eggs were really important for all sorts of reasons, for food, for lots of different things. Then to lose that, then that would just be a story from the past. It wouldn't be something that people could experience and have that connection to the past, to their ancestors. So that's something that I think is so important, that we remember that these native species they're part of the history, part of the culture, and they're not just some thing you saw in a BBC documentary that was cool. They're something that your grandpa used to go out and get and depend on. And so I just think that makes them so special.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I don't know if this puts everything in perspective, but one of the things I remember after Hurricane Ivan, after all that devastation and everything, the one thing, well, for me anyway, not just for me, actually, no, there were other people around. One thing is, for me that made people maybe hopeful again was to see a pair of Cayman parrots flying across the skyline against that background of devastated trees and everything. That flash of color. People looked at that and you could see people's attitudes change. So yeah, you're right. Those things represent Cayman. They're part of who we are. They're what makes us special and what identifies us.
It's pretty amazing. There's a recent really big report on invasive species that came out that had like 13,000 sources. They worked on it for years and years. And they found that 88% of the times that they've tried to eradicate invasive vertebrates from islands, they've been able to do it. You have to be willing to go. And there have been plenty of ones where they've wiped rats off of offshore islands and saved seabird populations. So it can be done. It's not always easy, and it requires a lot of commitment. But there are certainly places where it's been done successfully, and they've seen results.
And there's a human element. There's always a human element, because you mentioned the emotions that go along with certain species, invasive species. Like an extreme example might be the cocaine hippos in Colombia.
Yeah.
Yeah, they started trying to cull them, and all of a sudden people got. First of all, they were wanting to get rid of them, and then when the actual program started, all of a sudden they changed their minds, and now I think they're trying to think of ways to sterilize them or something like that.
Yeah, I saw that.
How do you sterilize a 4-ton animal? It's not easy.
No.
But in this program, you mentioned a lot of wildlife. Is the trust looking at plants as well?
Yes, so the trust, one of the ones we've been dealing with the longest time from the plant side is logwood. So logwood was brought here from Central America, and it's used to make dye, but it also spreads like crazy. So if you've been down to the southern end of the Mastic Trail, we've been doing a very long-term logwood removal project there, where we try to take out logwood and get native species in to make sure they establish and try to keep the logwood out. But that's a really tricky one. And plants are really tough, because plants can persist, and plants are, when you remove the last rat from an offshore island, 2 years later, a rat's not just gonna spring up out of the dirt, but with plants it can. If there's a seed down in the dirt, that plant could come back. And so plants are really difficult. I definitely have to admit, plants are not my specialty either, but they are definitely one. And I know Brazilian pepper, you mentioned a couple times, is one of the ones that a lot of the people on island are really worried about. I think over on the Brac, especially, they're starting to see, and it's one that really worries them, because it's not just invasive, but it's harmful to people too. So plants are definitely a tricky one. I mean, talking about the Australian pines, the casuarinas, which I found out are not actually a pine tree. The needles are like a little branch that has tiny leaves on it. It's very crazy. But that's a whole nother thing. But if you ever think, I know if you go down by like Safe Haven Drive at the end, there's a huge stand of just the pine trees, and it's just the pine trees because if you go out there, the thick carpet of needles that they drop means nothing else can grow up underneath them. And so that's how they're modifying the ecosystem, and it's just a barren little area of just pine needles and pines, and that's it. So that's another one where it's just this thing that we're very used to seeing too. It's a problem. I was talking with some folks from other national trusts around the world today, and talking to a gentleman from Bermuda, and that's one of the things they're having there, where some of these species have been here for so long that we don't recognize them as not being native anymore, even though they may be causing harm to our ecosystems or even the economy sometimes, you know. So that's something that's really interesting, and it's something that I think the National Trust has a really important role in educating about what our native species are, why they're important, why they were important culturally. Like I said, different things that are not just ecologically important, but important economically and culturally. So I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to focus on, because there are a lot of emotions on the side of controlling invasive species. But one of the things that I've seen effective in other places is countering that with other emotions like pride. You know, places like Hawaii and New Zealand are two examples I use a lot, where they're really proud of their native species. They're proud of the uniqueness of it. They're proud of the fact that it is from there. It's authentically from there. And that pride, I think, really drives them to want to protect it even more. And Caymanians are proud and should be proud. It's an amazing place. And I'd love to see some more of that pride built in those native species and the fact that they are from here. You know, I'm sure you guys see that a lot at the Turtle Center. You know, people are probably proud to come in and show, this is a turtle, this is a Cayman parrot, this is, you know, this, it's special. It's something that isn't just another animal that's out there or plant that's out there. You know, I love sitting under sea grape trees at the beach, you know, the shade, or if they have the grapes on them and the parrots are there eating, like that's such a special experience that, you know, would be a shame to lose due to invasives. Yeah,
I was going to touch on, we have a blue iguana. Like we have an iguana that turns the color blue. Like that's very special and unique to here. Yeah. It deserves to be celebrated.
And they were almost wiped out at one point, in large part due to invasive species. You know, the adult ones, dogs were attacking and killing. The babies were getting taken by cats. It was, I mean, when you look at the history of the blue iguana, they were down to 10 to 25 in the wild. 22 years ago. And a lot of that had to do with invasive predators that they were not ready for, and still are not ready for, unfortunately. So we definitely see it out in the reserves where we release them. We have seen on our cameras that when the babies are emerging from the nests, that cats are flooding into those areas. You can see that they are moving into the soil areas where the iguanas are. So it's not something that is nice or fun to talk about. I don't think anyone who works in invasive species control, especially with those animals that we do all have emotions associated with, enjoys it. And so that's the thing. I know the people who are working on this issue in Cayman, and I know they're not, you know, bloodthirsty maniacs. They're out there because they want to protect our native species. And unfortunately, we've all let a problem get so bad that the answer is now having to do controls like that. And it's a thing that, you know, has happened in many places around the world, but right now it's the reality here. And it does stir up emotions, but it's important that the community knows about it, because it's a community problem, you know, especially like with the green iguanas. If we managed to eradicate all of them, they've done a pretty good job. You don't see them very much anymore, better than I thought it ever would be. But then if no one has them as pets anymore, there's never, you know, no one's going to accidentally let one out or let one out on purpose. But things like cats and dogs, no one is going to propose, I think, that you can't have pets. Right. And so there's always potential for them to keep getting out and keep reinvading, which is unlike some other invasive species that, maybe were accidentally introduced once and not going to happen again.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's we have a lot to go through.
It was a long discussion. Yeah.
Yes. I think we take a break here, and when you come back, we'll continue this conversation, because it's getting really interesting. Looking at it from a social aspect as well. And that's something that's really important, because, like you said, people have to understand the impact of these things, not only ecologically, but how it affects us emotionally as well. So we've been talking about invasive species here in the Cayman Islands, right here on the Green Scene. We're going to take a commercial break. Hang on, we'll be right back. Hi, this is Geddes from the Cayman Turtle Conservation Education Center.
Hi, this is Shona from the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center.
Hey, this is Wendy from the Cayman Turtle Conservation and Education Center. We're inviting you to our new show.
Welcome to Cayman Turtle Center.
A day of fun and adventure awaits at Cayman Turtle Center Island Wildlife Encounter. Swim and snorkel alongside sea turtles and other marine life. Meet tropical birds in the aviary, ride our turtle twister water slide, or simply relax by the lagoon. Plan your adventure today.
Visit us online at www.turtle.ky.
Did you know that turtles play an important role in ocean ecosystems? Turtles maintain healthy seagrass beds and coral reefs, providing key habitat for other marine life and helping to balance marine food webs and nutrient cycling. Learn more about our turtle friends at the Cayman Turtle Center.
Hello, my name is Coco. I'm a Cayman parrot at the Cayman Turtle Center. I was rescued and love my home here. Did you know our human friends at the center breed and raise Cayman parrots, the national bird of the Cayman Islands, then release them to live in the wild? Come visit me and my bird friends at Cayman Turtle Center.
Hello, welcome back to the Green Scene, hosted by the Cayman Turtle Center. My name is Geddes Hislop, and myself and Education Programs Officer Shauna McGill. We've been here with our special guest, Mr. A.J. McGovern from the National Trust. The whole topic today was invasive species. If you missed this episode, you can check it out on our YouTube channel. But it was quite an interesting thing. So we're going to try to just summarize this here, so if you're just tuning in. First of all, we define invasive species as a species that's not native and that kind of proliferates in an environment where it's not supposed to be. In other words, they breed and produce a whole bunch of offspring, and that causes issues. So a common, a very obvious one that people know about is the green iguanas. You bring them in, all of a sudden there's a lot of them, and they cause problems. They eat stuff, they compete with all the native blue iguanas, and native species tend to do that. And they can have quite devastating impacts. Not just environmentally, but even in some cases, it can affect your economy, and definitely in terms of culture. They can alter environments. Like I think AJ mentioned, was it in Safe Haven? Right? There's a whole grove of these Australian pines, casuarinas. Yeah. And that grove is exclusively casuarinas because those pine needles pack the ground so much that nothing else can grow there. So there's a potential for invasion species to change an environment into something that's not native to what you're used to, what is supposed to be there. We had talked a lot about cats.
Talked a lot about cats,
yes. Unfortunately, cats are an invasive species. And you made a very good point that the cats themselves are not evil.
Yeah.
It's that they've been put in a situation where they have to survive.
And they're not naturally from here. They've been introduced here.
Yeah, they've been introduced here, like some of the things. And again, not all invasive species are bad, like mangoes. But some of them are highly impactful, like cats, like green iguanas, like lionfish. And in the vast majority of the cases, there's a human element to that happening. So we are responsible. We have to do something about it, because the environment, especially on a small island like this, an isolated ecosystem that took millions of years to evolve to what it is, to establish itself as it is, it can't change, adapt to handle things like that.
No, the change is happening very rapidly. Like I believe AJ did touch upon, these invasive species that are exploding rapidly, like the green iguana, like the lionfish, they are very prolific breeders, more so than the species they're affecting, and that's why they're having such an impact. And then you also add the fact that they don't have any natural predators here, they're just exploding in numbers.
Yeah, and then, of course, an ecosystem is kind of like a hotel. It only has a certain amount of space that it can handle. So if an invasive species comes in and it outcompetes a native species, somebody's got to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and losing that native species is a travesty at the very least. Because, for example, blue iguanas. Blue iguanas are such an iconic species here, and we almost lost them.
It's so close. We had less than 30 individuals in 2002 in the wild.
Yeah, and now we've got up to a little over 1,000.
We've released over 1,000.
Over 1,000, but even then, the same issues that brought them to the brink of extinction back then are still here now, and even more so, because they were getting run over by cars. Cats were taking out the babies, dogs were taking out the adults, and there's still cats, maybe even more, and there's still dogs, maybe not as much, who knows, and there are even more roads, more cars. And I
think we've also spoken with the Blue Iguana program a little while ago, and we also found out that humans in cars are also causing an issue for blue iguanas. Not so much in accidentally hitting them, but potentially hitting them on purpose. So it sort of shows how effective the education of just how negative the green iguanas are for the environment, in terms of most of us who live here aren't very receptive of them. But you also do have some people that try to run them over on purpose. But the downside is sometimes people might not notice if it's a blue iguana that's naturally grazing on the side of the road as opposed to a green iguana. So that does raise the fact of properly knowing how to identify these invasive species. And sometimes when you're in a car, it's a little bit difficult. But with the blues and greens, if you have them not even side by side together, there are some very distinct ways to tell the difference. So one of the main ways is by looking at their tails. So the green iguanas have striped tails, whereas blue iguanas have a more uniform tail color. If you get close to the face, there's also the round scale on the cheek that green iguanas have. Blues have more spiky cheeks too. And there are quite a few other differences between the two, but those are one of the more noticeable ones from a distance.
And also one is green and one is blue, usually. Yeah.
But you can have, on our cooler days or cooler periods, they might not.
Well, they
might be very gray.
Yeah, because they both kind of turn grayish before they warm up. Yeah, that's so you guys out there driving, I know you're trying to do a good thing, but maybe it might not be a good idea just to run over an iguana, unless it's obviously green. And and then what else we talked about? We mentioned that invasive species can also be plants as well as animals. And the thing is, we need to have that sense of pride because some of these animals or some of these plants might be appealing to us. Because, again, we go back to little fuzzy things like cats. It's hard to think that you might have to take out a cat in order for something else to survive. The thing is, the cats aren't there. The cats don't belong there. And cats out in the wild at Cayman, as you mentioned, it was a very good point he made. The distinction of the three different categories of cats. Where you have the pet cats that you keep at home. You have the stray cats that hang around human habitation. What some people might term outdoor cats. Some of these cats go from house to house and get food. So they still depend on humans to a point. And then you have the feral cats, which are basically wild cats. Nothing to do with humans. And there are a lot more of them than you think. Because just because you don't see them doesn't mean they're not there. You know, anybody that's done field work at wildlife knows you very rarely actually see the animals, but they're having an impact. You know, that thing that you mentioned, the putting out the camera traps and seeing the cats come into the reserve when the iguanas are hatching.
That learned behavior, man.
Yeah, they're actively hunting these our indigenous iguanas. You know, and iguanas are such an iconic species for Cayman, because I remember when I went to one of these conferences overseas, and we visited a zoo as part of one of the activities. And when these guys found out I was from Cayman, it was like almost worship, because it grabbed me and ran off to proudly show me the blue iguanas that they had on display. And they asked me all kinds of questions. Do you think this worked? I thought, should we feed them that? You know, Cayman is out there. You know, and things like the blue iguanas, they represent who we are. And invasive species are one of their top threats. So, you know, it's something that we definitely need to take care of. And, you know, so today we were discussing invasive species, and our guest AJ from the National Trust gave us a whole different perspective, looking at the human element of it, the social aspect of it. You know, invasive species by themselves are an issue. Anything from the pythons in Florida to the green iguanas here and the lionfish, mongoose. You know, they can be quite devastating. But then again, there is always a human impact. We have to. The species out there are not the ones that can solve that problem.
They're just out there surviving at the end of the day.
In every case, in every success story, even of controlling invasive species, there's always a human element. And, you know, it's a large investment. But the investment is, well, I guess a matter of perspective, but the investment is worth it, because to maintain if you want to protect your culture and your heritage, and, you know, for generations to come, you have to step in there and do something impactful. You know, because the invasive species themselves are impactful, even in the name. An invasion is not a nice name. It's not a nice term in any form. Whether you're invading a country or you get a species invading your ecosystem. You know, another thing he said, you know, they're coming at us all the time. There's always something trying to get in the door.
There always will be, yeah.
Yeah, and what he said, about 10% of them make it through, and then all that 10%, another percentage of them will actually establish themselves. Only takes one good one. Green iguanas. At some point, a couple of green iguanas got in, started laying eggs, and look where we are today. Oh, and one more thing. AJ had mentioned on his way out, he did mention something. There's a survey that they're going through, because they're working on an invasive species policy together with the Department of Environment. So we just played this clip here where he mentioned a survey that he wants to go through.
So one last thing I wanted to mention, that, you know, I've been talking, we want the community's input, because it's important for us to make these solutions to these problems with the community. So right now we have a survey open for those living on the BRAC and on Little. We have 2 different surveys about this issue. So if you go on our social medias, you will find these surveys for the Sister Islands. And even if you're not from the Sister Islands, you can answer it as well, because we do want to get the wider communities thing. But if you can, go fill that survey in and let us know your thoughts on it, so we can tailor the conservation work to what the community wants and what the community can work towards together. So, thank you.
Okay, so as we wrap up today, do you have any last thoughts or comments, Shauna?
Yeah, I will just follow up on what AJ said, and like, as Caymanians, we should be all in and care for our native and endemic species, especially. We're a tiny little island in the Caribbean, and or 3 islands, and these species are only found on each of the islands. The blue iguana is only found on Grand Cayman. The Sister Islands rock iguana only found on the sister islands. So we really do need to take care of these species in the hopes that they stick around. They've been here since 1503, even since before we had early settlers, and we need to do our part to make sure the environment is as safe as them. So we really need to do our part in just hyping them up, essentially, and showing how important they are and preserving them in our culture and on our islands.
No, definitely. So they are part of what makes Cayman Cayman. They're the original Caymanians, and we owe it to them.
And the parrots are the original flag carrier.
Yes, the parrots are the original flag carriers. All of these species, in fact, make us who we are. You know, it's definitely not 7 Mile Beach, and it's definitely not a hotel. It makes Cayman Cayman. It's the fact that we have these species that are an integral part of our culture and our heritage that make us special. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and join us again next week. So just to let you know some of the things that are coming up this week at the Cayman Turtle Center. As always, shark talks and shark feeding, Mondays to Fridays. Shark talks happen at 10:30 a.m. at the predator viewing window, and shark feeding happens 11 a.m. at the bridge right next to the Schooner's restaurant. For those of you guys that are looking for something to do with your kids and enjoy yourself, you can visit our little Garden of Eden there in the aviary. The Caribbean aviary is home to a number of birds found in Cayman and the Caribbean. You can make a small donation to our turtle conservation program, at least $1, and enjoy hand feeding the birds. You can have a bird on your hand, birds hanging around you. You can feed the colorful ibis, and kids especially enjoy that. Grill and chill Saturdays. Every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. you can dive into a poolside barbecue. We have a live DJ. You can soak up some sun, get some daiquiri and beer bucket specials. Just pay a general admission for the pool access, and you can relish the DJ tunes and savor some delicious barbecue delights. Perfect weekend retreat for you and your family. Turtle nesting season is here. When you get to the Turtle Center, you can visit our hatchery, which is a blue building right next to the big breeder pond with all the big turtles. There are a couple of statues of baby turtles, sculptures of baby turtles on the outside. You come in there, and right behind the glass wall, you can see the hatchery beginning to fill up. Those white egg boxes full of eggs incubating. Hatchlings aren't here just yet. Give them a couple months, probably towards end of April, early May, and you'll start seeing those little babies, the ones we call Oreo cookies with flippers. For information on these and other things happening at the Cayman Turtle Center, you can visit our website, www.turtle.ky, or visit our Cayman Turtle Center social media platforms on Facebook and Instagram. You can contact us at info, that's INFO, at turtle.ky if you have any questions or comments on the show. And if you'd like to hear today's episode or any other The Green Seed episodes, you can visit them on our Cayman Turtle Center YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in today. You can tune in to the next Green Scene episode. Well, we're here every Saturday at 11 a.m. right here on Bobo 89.1 FM. And thank you for listening. Remember, you can help our sea turtles and Cayman environment by picking up 3 pieces of plastic a day. See you next week.
Looking for something fun and different to do with the family? Join us at the Cayman Turtle Center for Grill and Chill Saturdays. Every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., enjoy a poolside barbecue, buckets of beer and daiquiri specials, and a live DJ. It's Grill and Chill Saturdays at Cayman Turtle Center.